Well, hi, Maisha.
Hi, Rhonda.
I'm really excited about our conversation today, and I'm really grateful that Toya Randall asked for us to sit and talk with each other. We get an opportunity to tell a little bit of our story today.
I know, I'm looking forward to it.
So, I'm Rhonda Bryant. I'm president and CEO of the Moriah Group. We are a consulting firm based in Huntsville, Alabama, but doing work around the country. We're focused on changing the future for children, and we do that through research and strategy and action in partnership with philanthropy as well as local governments.
And I'm Maisha Simmons. I'm the director of the New Jersey team at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We are a health and healthcare foundation, improving healthcare and building a culture of health for everyone in America. So this is fun getting able to having the opportunity to talk to you because I was looking it up earlier, Rhonda. We've known each other almost 13 years at this point.
Yeah,
13 years.
yeah. It is crazy to think about it. I think about I everything that I do in this work, I base around my son's age.
Mm-hmm.
He was a newborn when I got started in this work. And
Wow.
so when I begin to think back all those years,
Mm-hmm.
and all the things that we have done together. Do you remember how we met?
I do. I do. I do. So, can I start this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So, this fabulous report has just come out. We Dream a World from the Open Society Foundation. And at the time, I was trying to learn and understand the BMOC landscape. And this report came across my desk, and a colleague of mine, Brenda Henry, said, we really should think about the authors of this report and how we're thinking about the work at RWJF. So we reached out and called you, and you were at CLASP at the time. And immediately, you know how you're talking to folks on the phone, but you put the person on mute, and Brenda and I are just like, oh my, we're just like, this is going to be fabulous. Oh, she's so great. We cannot wait to work with her. And it was like, I don't think we really called anybody else. We were just like, we want you to do just what you did there for something that we're thinking about at RWJF. And from then, I think we figured out how to work with each other off and on for the last, almost 13 years at this
Hmm.
point.
Hmm. And
What's your story?
well, I don't know if you even remember this. Um, you were doing the exploratory work within RWJF, and you had hired a consultant to do these focus group conversations to learn
Mhm.
more about how different people were working on projects and what their area of focus was related to boys and young men of color. And one of the focus groups was scheduled, and I logged on and I was the only one there. And I
What?
spent nearly an hour on the phone with your consultants just talking about all, the different things that we had been working on, but
Mhm.
also asking them, well, who is Maisha Simmons? What is she working on? Why is this, investigation happening now? What is RWJF thinking? And then that led to us being able to schedule a call
Mm.
with one another. And,
Wow.
I just have to say that ever since then, you have become like a sister to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
We have shared so many conversations and talked about so many things on the personal side and on the professional side that has really made an impact on the way that I think about the work. And I'm
Yeah.
just glad that we got connected all those years ago and we stayed together.
I agree. I mean, I remember going to national conversations, small conversations, and you being on panels and presenting the work, and me taking notes on how to mirror some of the things that you were doing and how you were presenting. And you have this masterful beauty of being able to present the data, but then also quantitative data, which folks like in my world need to know and understand, but then wrap into it qualitative data, and then another layer of an anchor into story. And the way you're able, it humanizes the
Mhm.
young people, the issues. We're not just boxes that were checked off. And I was always amazed you've been able to do that. And I have been so excited to work with you over the years. I mean, even when I wasn't at Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, we found a way to connect in and still see what's going on with the work. So I just feel like this opportunity for us to share and talk about our work in the BMOC field over the years is just so appropriate, because we've been on this journey side by side, almost together in various aspects of the work. So I'm excited that Toya gave us this opportunity as well. So I've always wanted to ask you this question. What was the thing, because you were in this work before I was, what was the thing that brought you to this work?
Hmm. So, honestly, so I've always been doing work on kids of color my entire career. That's been my focus. And when I got pregnant with my son, when I found out I was carrying a boy, the rest of my pregnancy became just a time of really deep reflection for me.
Mm,
And I began to think about my brother, his friends, my cousins, what all of their experiences were like. And then I began to think about the children at the Boys and Girls Club that I worked at. That was my first job out of graduate school. And I began to reflect on how, for me, it was always my boy students that were facing struggles. I
mm,
mean, everything from a ninth grader who couldn't read to a straight A student who was denied opportunities for college. It was always the boys. And
mm,
so for me, when I found out I was having a son, I was determined that this was not going to be his trajectory and he was not going to have these same struggles. So I took my first job in national policy when my son was only 3 months old.
mm,
And I attended my first planning meeting around the Black men and boys work at the time that the Ford Foundation pulled together when my son was 17 months old. And
mm,
those were real markers for me in my career. And this has been my work ever since
mm.
because it was
Wow.
all about him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's similarly, the opportunity to work on this issue for me came because a colleague of mine, I wasn't even in the position of a program officer at the time. I was a program associate. So a lot of the early work I was doing as a program associate at RWJF. And I was working with him. He was really trying to think about how RWJ can get involved in the issue, and his roles and responsibilities shifted. So it was kind of like, well, Maisha's been shadowing me. Maisha, here, see if there's something you can do with this body of work. And it was my first opportunity to lead on a project at RWJF, but personally. And, I've talked about, if anyone has heard me tell stories at the various convenings that we've held over the years, I've always talked about my Isaiah. And when we started this work, Isaiah was 14 years old and really having a hard time navigating, boyhood just in general. And, in the same token, a lot of our work at RWJF was what we would call at the other end of the pipeline. So working in folks who are in the justice system and coming out of the justice system. And it was a specific conversation that I had with some of our grantee partners. And I said, you work with men all the time, and you work with men who are struggling and trying to live their best lives and work through a lot of issues around trauma and, other things that I got to learn later through you and Howard in the work that I had just an inkling of an understanding now, but a much deeper understanding because of the work of Forward Promise and what's going now. And I said, if you could talk to your younger self, what would you do? And they said, I'd go way back to middle school. And Isaiah was in middle school at the time. And I could see what they were saying reflected in his life. And I said, well, if I have any type of influence or power on this work, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go up the pipeline, think about middle and high school age young people, and really think about what the needs they have. And that's when we were able to, I was doing a lot of listening and a lot of learning, and there were a lot of folks in the field who kind of opened the doors for me to do that listening and learning. But it was the report that you did that was the actual springboard to action. So, a lot of folks complain about philanthropy and, doing a lot of extractive work and not really trying to reflect in the work that needs to happen in communities. And some of that listening we did through a call for ideas. We just opened up the world and said, if you had resources, what would you do? And we tried to create a call for proposals that was reflective in the call for ideas. So each step of the way matching what the field wanted and what I had the opportunity and power and leverage to do in terms of directing resources. And so ever since, in different types of ways, I've been connected to the field. I don't lead the work at RWJF anymore, but I still stay connected to what's going on with the folks in the field and what's going on there. So it's been a great journey. It's been a great journey.
I remember the first time you told the story about Isaiah.
Mm.
It was at the 2012 Gathering of Leaders.
Yep.
And you kicked it off by sharing that story. And I remember sitting there. I was so proud of you that day because here you are, working inside RWJF to try to push this agenda. And you have funded and planned and convened this first gathering of national voices on the topic, researchers, organizers, policy advocates, etc., all in the room together, never been done before. And I kept saying to myself, we don't know 1/10 of the lift that it was for you to have to do that inside of the foundation. So what was that like, particularly in those earlier years, as you were trying to navigate philanthropy and set the stage for the importance of this work?
It's interesting because 10 years ago, I had a lot more energy for the push, right? And it was, the world didn't look the way it looked today. I think about how philanthropy in particular, you think about the uprising that happened around the murder of George Floyd, and there was some sort of call to action. And this is the first time that I've been in philanthropy where I saw clearly, vocal and commitments, not just in mouth, but also resources going to different communities across the country. And I think back to where we were when we started the Gathering of Leaders and how, for me, every step of the way was intentional. It was intentional that we said young men and boys of color. We wanted to be explicit and specific. That required, I don't know how many countless numbers of meetings to really be able to think about the institution in their comfort level of naming what we're working on. And then, really thinking about how we build conversations that are not just rooted in, we have to bring the data in. It's part of RWJF brand, but the types of data that we brought into when I was talking about the work that you do, the story from young people, the story from people who are working in community with young people, along with the qualitative and quantitative data. I don't know how many times, we would have to harp on what was going wrong and didn't have enough opportunity to talk about what was happening right. And so, that was a lift too. And then I would say the other thing was, it really took a lot of time to dismantle the silver bullet mentality. The institution recognizing it isn't just one program or one system or one approach. These young people, and we know from, these young people are living full lives and all types of things that are happening in their daily life, from in their homes to their communities, to their schools, with their neighbors, friends, people they love. And we have to, when we're having these conversations, you have to take all that into context. And so, it was a constant drumbeat of that. And then I would say the other piece that I was very intentional about was, I wanted to work with firms of color, researchers of color, conveners and coordinators of color. They were, and specifically broadening the tent to this conversation, not to be about Black men and boys, but thinking about the broader context of the community of young men and boys of color. And we can definitely talk about what that meant in the field and us really championing that. But that was another way that I had to, really think about how the foundation can be expansive and inclusive of how we do the work. And so it led to some interesting surprises along the way. And I really, because you came at the work from a different point of view, I want to know, once you're 5 years, you're deep into the work, what were some of the things that surprised you about doing this work?
Mm. So there were a few things I think that surprised me. So when I started doing this work, I was in the policy space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we know that, 10, 15 years ago, that was a space that was so hesitant about doing anything that specifically talked about issues of race. And so I was continually surprised, although I probably shouldn't have been, by colleagues who pushed back so hard on any conversation about race as it related to us advancing some sort of policy agenda, and
Mm-hmm.
having to convince people who are supposed to be quote unquote liberals about the fact that these problems are structural and not individual, and the fact that no piece of policy has value if we are not also going to be committed to making sure that the targeted implementation in communities of color happens. And so many people felt like, well, we got the policy passed, our work here is done. But we know as Black folks that there's a whole nother layer to that that has to be done.
Yep.
And so I was oftentimes disheartened by the colleagues that I worked with in the national space about that piece. And it was part of the reason why I left that space and decided to create the Moriah Group, because I was like, if we're going to if we're going to do this work, we have to understand that the implementation work that happens in our communities is just as important. And we have to have an eye on that. And we have to be the watchdogs on that.
That's right.
I think the other thing, though, that surprised me about this work was how easy it was for women to be rendered invisible. There were so many women who were doing research, working in their local communities, writing curricula for programs, leading organizing movements within their communities, whose voices were never heard. I remember having conversations with some of our sisters and them feeling really disempowered because the men took up all of the airspace.
Yes.
And that was hard. And I think for me, because as women, we are committed to the end goal.
Yes.
Which is we want our brothers to be successful. We want our children to be successful. We allowed ourselves to be disempowered in service to the larger goal.
Yeah.
But it frustrated me because there were men in the space that were just okay with doing that. I can tell you stories about times when I saw my data being presented without attribution. Sitting in the audience and people asking questions about the data that the presenter could not answer. And I'm like, well,
that's what you get.
Or, I remember when you were spinning Forward Promise out of the foundation, folks who literally thought I was a non-factor.
Yeah.
As people were applying for and gearing up for wanting to do that work. And it's unfortunate, but at the end of the day, I'm about our boys and making sure that they're okay. So I'm going to lay that to the side and keep pushing and doing the work. But I wish that it were not that way.
Yeah. And as women, we find ourselves doing that all the time. I mean, it's interesting because when I think about some of the things that surprised me as well, it goes to a little bit of what you were saying. It was, so as a funder, right? I was seen as a person around the issue, but not an authority on the issue. And I can remember countless times people thinking that, the consultants that I were working with, who are often men and great people, right? Frontline Solutions, I worked with for many years. BCT Partners, I worked with for many years. And, but, it was almost like, let me get them to tell Maisha to say yes, or something like that. And I was like, I spend as much time in the data and the research and trying to understand the issue, as anyone else in this room. And so, it was disappointing to be seen that way, because I always thought of myself as, and I know there's a difference when you're a funder in the work, but I always thought of myself as an ally. So just like you would be some of the places and you would see brothers can take off their masks and take off the shield and be in relationship and partnership with others around the table, I never quite got to that space. And and I think a lot of it had to do with some of the things that you were talking about in terms of just being a woman in the space. And I think the other thing that surprised me was this competition between the boys space and the girls space. And and especially us as women being challenged, like, well, you're a woman, don't you think, what about the girls? And my answer always was, I believe in intentional funding to issues related to girls as well, right? I don't think there's no either or in my mind. And if you even study movements and movement history, us as an aligned group is much stronger than us as disparate groups. However, the strategies, the approaches, they need to be defined and very specific to how girls are experiencing issues and how boys are experiencing issues. And it's some of the reason why we're seeing the problems that we're seeing, school systems designed around how girls learn versus how boys learn. Or in some of these other things where when you can tailor your approaches, then you can have a much, I think about having much greater impact and the work going much further. And I found that was also, some of the divisiveness in the field and, some of those kinds of conversations that I thought really detracted from really what we were all sitting around the table to do, was to have this, really specific conversation about not the flaws of young people, but to your point, the flaws of the systems that we have, designated for their success, that are really not built for them to be successful. I'll never forget the time where I was sitting in a meeting and we were talking about the prison system, and people are saying this all the time now, and maybe it was just provocative to me, but when somebody was like, the prison system is doing what it's designed to do. What are you talking about? Rehabilitate, is about reform. When we think about some of the ways that school discipline practices and all these other, they're meant to push out our kids. And so how do we dismantle and destruct that has always been my goal in the work at the table.
Yeah. I think about what was happening in the world when the Boys and Young Men of Color work was created, and before that, when the Black boys work was created. And people always cite the Newsweek article or this Times article that that happened in certain at that time, and how those were driving forces and factors in this laser focus on Black boys and then on boys and young men of color. And really the focus came because someone brought national attention to boys' issues, not because there weren't issues that girls were facing as well. Absolutely. And so we were moved by this national story that was written by one or two very well-intentioned authors. But in retrospect, I think we would have done better to take a look at the data and do the analysis of what's happening for boys, what's happening for girls, and create something that we could have built from the ground together.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the issues are the same, but the backdrop, the gendered backdrop is slightly different. So, when we're thinking about school discipline or high school dropout, the reasons behind some of that are vastly different. A lot
Mhm.
of our girls are staying home to take care of younger siblings. A lot of our boys are dropping out to get jobs to help provide for the family. So
Yep.
the reasons are different. And so some of the solutions are not identical, but the overarching issue of racism and what's happening in our communities is the same. So how can we tackle this together? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I'm grateful that there are now some really strong conversations happening around how do we bring this work back into alignment with each other. And I
Mhm.
feel like, honestly, if there are women in the space on both the boys and the girl sides, we can figure it out.
I agree. I
We can
agree.
figure it out and we can strip away any of the emasculating behavior around why this should not happen, and just get to the root of the issue and solve things for our whole communities. Because at the end of the day, we're all connected. Our families are no better off if only our boys or only our girls are thriving.
That's
So we
right.
have to do it together.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, early on you talked about your mark of time and Andrew. So how is Andrew doing?
Girl, it's hard to believe, the time goes so fast. People say all the time, that the years go by fast, but some of those minutes go by real slow. I remember there was a woman who told me when he was very young, you get 18 summers with him,
Mm.
because the summers are the time when you get to spend a lot of good quality time.
Mhm.
During the school year, it's kind of like this routine of going to school, coming home, having dinner, start it all over again. So we are about to have our 16th summer.
Wow. You're almost wow.
Yeah,
Your
he
time is
is
getting short, Rhonda.
in 10th grade.
Mm.
And he just took his PSATs for the first time.
Mm.
And we are preparing for college visits to start. We'll figure out what that looks like in COVID, but he's already got a list of places he's thinking about. And I'm
Wow.
really proud of the young man he's becoming. He's an athlete and a scholar, you
Mhm.
know, very clear about what he wants to do and who he wants to be. I think that a lot of the struggles that he has had in his life as a Black boy and now a Black young man have defined what he wants to become. The
Mm.
things that he's seen in his family life. Um, and he's talked about wanting to become a psychologist, maybe, and
Oh.
working specifically with boys of color because he sees that there's a huge need there. He's talked about wanting to get into the social justice space and figuring out what that looks like for him, which of the issues are most important. Um, and so we're looking at internship opportunities for him at the Moriah Group to
Okay.
figure all of that out. And yeah, I can't believe that it's almost time to send him off to college, but this is where we are.
I remember you bringing Andrew to different events over the years. And, when I see pictures and now he's taller than you.
Girl, almost a whole foot taller. That child is 6'3".
Oh, it's funny to see the children in the work and how they've grown up and, over the years and what they're becoming. I am hoping that the work that we've done is making the road a little bit easier
Yeah,
for our kids.
yeah. And you became a mother in the midst of this work.
Yeah, I cannot believe it. So Miles is 6 years old, and I remember being at a gathering of leaders, very pregnant, and just so excited. We were in California, and I was so excited because, to the same token, when you talked about earlier, so my husband wanted a girl and I wanted a boy. I really wanted a boy. I didn't want to do hair, but that's a little small piece of it. But I really, I think maybe from Isaiah or whatever it is, but I just found I gravitated towards boys. So I was really excited to have a son, to be in the work, in the movement, and thinking about the type of world that I want my son to grow up in. And now he is discovering his blackness. So, we're having these conversations about what it means to be a Black boy. And, one of the things that you said to me early on, I think Miles might have been 3, was about, understanding what they are into and what they like. And as a parent, your role to nurture that. And I've taken that advice with me all the time because this child is into space. I didn't know there was more than 9 planets. He's telling me all about the different planets. He loves math. I am not into math, but it's not about what I'm into. It's really trying to nurture the spaces and places that he's into. And, how important it is my role as a parent to curate those spaces, like really think about spaces that's going to take care of his head and his heart and just his whole well-being. And really think about how not to repeat patterns of toxic masculinity and all the things that I learned from being a part of the movement and things that harm our babies. Really being intentional about how I am instilling in him, knowing that, prayerfully one day, of course, he already told me he wants to be a dad. That's what prayerfully he wants to have children. And just knowing that the generational way, this is a generational thing and how we do the work. And then also, making sure that I'm an advocate for what he needs in school and in community. So, I am so excited to see where, we're on the opposite ends of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Kindergarten, high school, but all really, dedicated to thinking about the work. So
Yeah.
I am grateful to see and model what I see as some of my parents and friends who are parents are doing in this space. I'm learning a lot from you all. So I'm excited.
And like our friend Hector at National Compadres Network always talks about, we just had a call recently. He talks about how our children will grow up in the work and our children will become connected to one another because of our work. And, they'll see each other out in the field doing the work and have that connection from years before. And I'm actually looking forward to that. We are raising, because of our awareness and our commitment, we're raising up an army of children who will be equally aware and connected and want to make a difference for their communities because they see that it is important and they see that their parents have done it.
Yeah.
And that is really, really my hope.
Yeah, our children are sacred.
Yes.
Hector's words, our children, even when they're not feeling really sacred at the time, our children are sacred. Oh my gosh. Well, Rhonda, it has been excellent. We get to talk all the time, but we don't necessarily always get to share our chats with everybody. And I'm excited that I had the chance to talk with you and, spend some time reflecting on our journey that, it's still going, girl. As long as we're in this work, it's still going. And I appreciate all that you do. I appreciate where Florida Promise has grown under you and Howard's leadership. You have taken it leaps and bounds beyond whatever I could have done as managing the work internally. And, the innovation and creation that you all have brought to, and I'm just talking specifically Florida Promise, and the mark that you are leaving on the world and the field is remarkable. I sit at the feet of you guys' leadership all the time and continue to learn from you. And, I'm grateful that you all have this dedication, you in particular, have this dedication to this work that is, unfleeting. You're just as passionate as you are today as you were 13 years ago when we had this conversation. And I was like, girl, let's do it. Let's work this together. So I remain inspired by that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And I think that this conversation and all of the conversations that Toya is curating about the ways that as women we are impacting the work are really important. Because there are so many other women like us who have been sitting in philanthropy and other spaces that have been championing causes. And I'm glad to be able to share just a little bit of our story and our journey And I hope that it inspires other people to want to do this work, and to just be a light.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Toya. Well, Rhonda,
I
I
think we're
think we
done.
will, yeah, I think we're going to go on about our way. Be blessed, my sister.
You do the same.